part 4. So they were doing. There was a whole lot of time wasting going on, um, and I was certain that at some stage it became very clear to me that he was hoping that I would just go away. So he was prolonging this whole thing, and I wasn't budging. So in the end, I sent an usher to him that I have to go now because I'm expected somewhere else. So he asked me to come to the front or to the middle, as it were, and he said, "Oh, God sent this brother to us, but let's pray for him as he goes on his way." And I said, "No, I'm not going." I said, "God told me to say something here, so let me say what I have to say before I go." And I think because I said that in front of the whole congregation, he just had to let me speak. So, and I didn't do it deliberately, but I just, as I've sat down here for over an hour, I'm late for where I'm going, and I still have to travel to where I'm going, and you're wasting my time and trying to get rid of me. No, no, sir. I'm going to say what I have to say today. And then I started to speak. At some point in the corner of my eye, I realized that he was writing furiously everything I was saying. He was writing down, writing down, writing down, writing down. I thought, God, well, maybe he's just writing it down so that, he can say some guy came and said all this nonsense. But I just carried on. And as I began to speak, all I could hear was, you see now, I've told you. Tell them. When I'm the one telling them. He was saying all of this while I was speaking. He said, when I'm telling you, yeah, you see now, a total stranger. Da, 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 da. He didn't know who I was. So when I finished, one guy got up and began to prophesy and began to affirm me in prophecy. The pastor, who is the one who said I had a familiar spirit, he didn't know who I was. He got up and he started to talk to the church and say, you see, when I tell you things, because I'm your pastor and you're familiar with me, you don't take what I'm saying. I said, this guy, I've never met him before. I don't know who he is. I don't even know his name. And he's just walked in here from off the street, and everything that's going on, he's confirmed, and he's brought a solution, he's brought an explanation, and da 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 da. He was so happy. And he felt vindicated that, church, when I talk to you, I'm not talking nonsense. And and so I finished. We prayed. They prayed. I prayed for them. They prayed for me, and I left. I still didn't reveal who I was to him. Now, this happened on a Friday. On the Sunday, they had an event on Saturday. I went for the event on Saturday because their senior pastor was coming from Nigeria. This is Senior Pastor A, and he ministered and ministered well, wonderful. And I decided that I'd go for the Sunday, which was the grand finale. Now, like I said previously, when I got ahead of myself, there were people who were going from my church or the church I attend, and the plan was we'd all meet and sit together. But I was late. I got there, and when I got to the back, I was thinking, where would I find these people? And it was so packed. It was a big place. It was packed. And I just thought, I'm just going to sit wherever I find to sit. I didn't even bother because there was no way I could find them. And suddenly I saw somebody waving to me frantically. And it was the people I was supposed to meet. They had a seat, or they had obtained seats, the third row from the very front. And they had saved a seat for me. So I sat there. And I looked on the stage and I saw, obviously, the senior pastor A, who the word was for in the beginning. His associate, who said I had an evil spirit, or who said I was mentioned by a familiar spirit. And there were other pastors there because obviously you invite your guest ministers. And then the two supposed friends of mine, they were there. And all these other pastors were there. Now, Pastor B, whose church Senior Pastor A ministered in when I gave him the word, or wrote the prophecy out, he also was in the meeting. He was there also. So all of these people, some of these people are sitting on the platform, and some of them are sitting in the in the front, right at the very front where guest ministers are. Now, whenever I go to a function and they say ministers in the house stand up, or any ministers or whatever, I never stand up. Because I know that when they say ministers, they're talking about people that men have ordained and all that, they are installed as pastors or whatever. And I don't come in, I don't belong to that category, so I never stand up. So the associate pastor who said I had a familiar spirit, he took the mic. And because it was the final day, he said he was saying thank you to everybody who came out. And then he said, I want to recognize the pastors and the ministers in the house. Could they please rise? And so they all rose. Now, I didn't go there in the capacity of a minister. I was not an invited guest. I just went to hear a good sermon. And the pastors, they said, they stood up, he thanked them, and then they sat down. And then he pointed and said, you're a minister, stand up. He was pointing in my direction, but to be honest, I had no idea he was pointing at me. So I looked back to see which minister he was talking to. And he says, you looking back. Now, in between when I went to his church to minister, and this Sunday, when they had this conference thing, he had called me. And he was very excited about when I came, the word I spoke and everything. And he was like, he said, you know, we're like one spirit. That's what he said to me. And I didn't say anything. So now I'm in the church that he's the associate pastor or the branch pastor. And he asks me to stand up. And then he starts off by saying, he says, this brother came to our church to bless us, came with a phenomenal or fantastic word. And that he came with a word that was so in season. And that we are of one spirit. He says that openly, that we are of one spirit. He says that openly. And he said some kind of other things and thanked me for coming. Now, I don't glory in, I understood what was happening. God was vindicating me publicly. So that the very person that you've said has an evil spirit is the same person that you're saying you're of one spirit with. And how it was a delight to have met me and all that stuff. And then he says, could I please stay behind and come to the ministers and pastors reception? I was the only man standing when all of this was going on. There was nobody else. I was the only person standing. All the other pastors had sat down. And so I started to look around. And his senior pastor, I think that if he had this look on his face, I had to look away from him because I was embarrassed for him. Because he was sitting down there thinking, when did this guy come and how? he had this perplexed look on his face that, isn't this the guy that had the evil spirit? How the heck did he wind up in my church ministering to my people? And stuff like that. But you know something? God vindicated me. And all the people who were in the meeting were there. They were there. They were there. The same person that they said had an evil spirit is the same person who they were endorsing as one used by the Spirit of God. And that day, I was vindicated. Did I feel happy? To be honest, no, I didn't. I was indifferent. Yes, it's nice that I was vindicated, but I didn't sort of say, yeehaw! I didn't feel that way at all. I didn't feel that way at all. But I was satisfied or relieved. And I think I was more satisfied than relieved that in the very place where they had privately said all these nasty things about me, God publicly elevated me, and the word I know would go out. That's the more important thing, that people are going to go home and it was going to be the talk of their Sunday. That this guy that they said, he's the guy, and their pastor endorsed him and all of that. At the end of the service, I went to meet the chap. I said, do you know me? Because he still didn't know my name. He still did not know my name, you know. And I said, my name is so and so, and it didn't register. I said, you don't remember me? Do you? He says, no. I said, I'm the pastor who 5 years ago I had a word, and immediately he got defensive. I told him, I said, I'm the one that you guys said had a familiar spirit. I said, and immediately he was defensive. I said, you didn't, and he said, oh, and he started making excuses. I said, it's not a problem, brother. I'm not holding it against you. I just wanted you to know that I am that brother. And I don't think I've seen him since that day, which is quite a good number of years ago now. And so there are times when you have to leave things to God. Now, I need to say something. I need to qualify this whole thing of leaving things to God. Why? Now, if you look at Jesus, Jesus suffered many things before the eventual crucifixion. He was beaten, he was slapped, he was spat on. But these were sufferings in line with the will of God for his life as part of God's redemption plan as pertaining to us. So there are some hazards that come with your calling. What am I trying to say? Jesus was not mistreated. He only suffered in line with his calling and at the appointed time. So in other words, Jesus had to go to the cross. So yes, he was going to be arrested. Yes, he was going to be beaten. Yes, he was going to be reviled. Yes, he was going to be mocked and scourged. And yes, he was going to be crucified. But that was his predestined plan, or the predestined plan of God for his life, for our benefit. So it wasn't a case of people just maltreating Jesus, because until the time when Jesus was arrested, there is nowhere where it's recorded that anybody laid a hand on Jesus. There is nowhere where it's recorded that people just treated Jesus anyhow and shabbily. No. And the problem with many of us today is that we are suffering sufferings that have nothing to do with predestination and nothing to do with a call. If you are called to the prophetic office, especially if you're called to the Jeremiah, if you have the Jeremiah type calling, you need to recognize that some people are going to come up against you, and the Bible actually lists it. The rulers of the land, the princes, the priests, the people, that those categories of people are going to come up against you. It says so in Jeremiah 1. But God says, he's with you to deliver you, so they won't overcome you. But there was a category of people, and so there's some hazards to be expected with your calling. Now, I will never fight a man who comes against me when I'm in my calling, or when I'm operating in my calling. Because these things, there are some things I must suffer. There are some things that I must go through. But there are some things that we suffer that have nothing to do with that, and we just quote scripture and say, and say leave it to God, and we'll turn the other cheek, and we're suffering for Christ. Some of your sufferings are not suffering for Christ. You're just suffering because you have permitted yourself to suffer. And that's why I go back to what I said in my first video, is that you need to know when to leave things to God and when to turn the other cheek. And when to deal with things. Because Jesus was not abused. You couldn't have just gone up to Jesus and just treated him anyhow. Until the time of his arrest, nobody laid a hand on Jesus. Until the time of his arrest, nobody spat on Jesus. And in fact, Jesus told his disciples, he says that that at the appointed time, these are the things that are going to happen to me. My hour is coming. So it wasn't just sort of random idiot, some random person just mucking around with Jesus's life. And the problem with us today is we allow people to randomly muck around with our lives, and we say, well, God will vindicate. God vindicates. in line with the calling, in line with his purposes and his will for our lives. But it's not a license for you to allow people to just abuse you and misuse you, and then you sit back and say, "Oh, don't worry about it. God will do it. God is going to vindicate me. God is going to avenge me." We need to know the difference between just allowing this enemy to just batter us anyhow and suffering for his name's sake. And I don't fight anyone who's going to come up against me for his name's sake. But I want to tell you another thing also about suffering for his name's sake. When people come against you personally, sometimes it's not personal. Sometimes they're coming up against you personally for his name's sake. I'll give you an example. You're a preacher. You're not part of the established preachers. In other words, you're not one who went to Bible school and then the pastor has said, yes, you're the man, and lays his hands on you and gives you a function in the church. You're just a regular Joe Blogs. And my time is up, and I'll catch you in the next video.